I recognize you both. Judge Marcus Holloway's voice cut through the stunned silence of Courtroom 4B. His eyes locked on the two officers standing before his bench. Perhaps you should have checked my bar card before you put those handcuffs on me. Officers Brennan and Reynolds froze their faces, draining of color as recognition dawned. The same black man they'd slammed against a car hood less than 24 hours ago now sat elevated above them wearing judicial robes instead of a hoodie, holding a gavel instead of a gas pump. Before we dive into this story of justice and accountability, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Are you in New York, Los Angeles, maybe somewhere small where everyone knows everyone? Hit that subscribe button and stay until the end, because what happens in this courtroom will shock you. This isn't just about one judge or two cops. This is about a system that's been broken for a long time, and what happens when someone finally has the power to do something about it. Marcus hadn't been looking for trouble that Tuesday evening. At 45 years old, with 20 years on the bench, and a reputation that commanded respect in every Philadelphia courtroom, he'd learned to navigate the world carefully. But careful only goes so far when you're a black man in America, even when you're a judge. "Mom, I'll be back first thing in the morning," Marcus said, adjusting the thin hospital blanket over his mother's chest. Dorothy Holloway, 72, and stubborn as ever, had just come through heart surgery at Jefferson Hospital. The doctors said she'd be fine, but Marcus had seen that faraway look in her eyes when she thought no one was watching. "You don't have to come back so early, baby," Dorothy whispered, her voice weak but still commanding. "You have court tomorrow." "Court can wait. You can't." "Court never waits for anybody, and you know it." She squeezed his hand with surprising strength. "Go home to Vanessa and those babies. They need you too." Marcus kissed her forehead, breathing in the familiar scent of cocoa butter that not even hospital antiseptic could mask. "I love you, Mom." "I know you do. Now go on before visiting hours really end and they throw you out." The hospital hallways were nearly empty, just the night shift nurses moving quietly between rooms. Marcus had dressed down for the long day at the hospital, trading his usual tailored suits for jeans, sneakers, and a navy blue hoodie. The casual clothes felt strange against his skin after decades of professional attire, but comfort had mattered during those endless hours in uncomfortable waiting room chairs. His BMW's gas light had been on since morning. Marcus pulled into the Sunoco station off Roosevelt Boulevard, not thinking much about it. The area had been in the news lately, something about convenience store robberies, but that didn't concern him. He was just a man getting gas on his way home. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the nearly empty lot. Marcus swiped his credit card at pump 3, the mechanical voice telling him to begin fueling. He unscrewed his gas cap, inserted the nozzle, and squeezed the trigger. The numbers on the pump display started climbing. That's when he noticed the police cruiser. It wasn't passing by. It was circling the perimeter of the station, slow and deliberate, like a predator sizing up prey. Marcus kept his eyes forward, focusing on the pump display. Don't make eye contact. Don't give them a reason. The silent rules every black parent teaches their children echoed in his mind. The cruiser pulled in behind his BMW, blocking him in. Two officers emerged, both white, both young, both with that particular swagger that comes from wearing a badge and carrying a gun. Marcus took a slow breath, letting it out through his nose. "Stay calm. You know your rights. You've heard 1,000 cases just like this." "Evening, officers," Marcus said, as they approached, his voice steady and professional. "Something I can help you with?" Officer Brennan, the taller of the two with a crew cut and cold blue eyes, rested his hand on his holstered weapon. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in this area. Mind telling us what you're doing here?" The absurdity of the question would have been funny if it weren't so insulting. Marcus gestured to the gas pump. "Just getting gas on my way home from the hospital. My mother had surgery." "Let me see some ID," Brennan demanded, ignoring everything Marcus had just said. "May I ask why?" Marcus kept his voice level. "I'm simply purchasing fuel." Brennan's expression hardened. "You match the description of a suspect in a recent robbery. ID now." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "What exactly is this description beyond black male?" The second officer, Reynolds, stepped closer. "Sir, We need you to comply with our instructions immediately." Every fiber of Marcus's being wanted to challenge this, to demand they articulate specific, articulable facts that would justify this stop. But he'd seen too many cases where being right didn't matter if you ended up dead. "I'm reaching for my wallet," Marcus said clearly, moving his hand slowly toward his back pocket. "My name is Marcus Holloway. I'm a judge with the Philadelphia County Court of Common Pleas. My judicial ID is in my wallet." Brennan let out a short, harsh laugh. "Sure you are, and I'm the police commissioner." "I'm not joking, officer. If you'll just let me show you my identification." Marcus never finished the sentence. Brennan grabbed his arm and slammed him face first against the side of his car. The impact stunned him. His cheek pressed hard against cold metal, the taste of blood filling his mouth where he'd bitten his tongue. "What are you doing?" Marcus managed to say. His voice muffled against the car. "This is completely unnecessary." "Stop resisting!" Brennan shouted, wrenching Marcus's arms behind his back. "I'm not resisting," Marcus said through gritted teeth, forcing himself to go completely limp, even as every instinct screamed to fight back. "This is a mistake. My judicial ID is in my wallet." The handcuffs bit into his wrists. Reynolds kept his hand on his weapon eyes, darting around the gas station. "Is this really necessary?" a woman's voice called out. Marcus couldn't see her, but he could hear the shock in her tone. "He's just getting gas." "Ma'am, please stay back," Reynolds ordered. "This is police business." Mr. Patel, the gas station manager, came running out from behind the counter. Marcus had been coming to this station for years. They knew each other. "Officers, I know this man," Patel was practically shouting. "He comes here often. He's a regular customer, a judge." "Sir, return to the building or you'll be interfering with police business," Brennan barked, already steering Marcus toward their patrol car. Marcus caught Patel's eye. "Please call Diane Chen at the courthouse. Tell her what's happening." Patel nodded frantically, pulling out his phone as the officers pushed Marcus toward the cruiser. The indignity of it all hit Marcus harder than the physical force. They pushed his head down, forcing him into the back seat like he was nothing, like 20 years of service to the law, meant nothing, like his entire identity could be erased by two officers who saw only his skin color. Through the window, Marcus watched more people gathering phones held up recording. The woman who'd spoken up, a young couple, two teenagers, all watching as officers did what officers do. "This is a mistake," Marcus said again, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd commanded courtrooms for 2 decades. "You're making a very serious mistake." "They all say that," Reynolds replied, putting the car in drive. As they pulled away from the gas station, Marcus watched his BMW grow smaller in the distance. His car, his dignity, his constitutional rights all abandoned under fluorescent lights. The ride to Abington Township Police Station took 7 minutes. 7 minutes of listening to Brennan and Reynolds chat like they were carpooling to a barbecue instead of transporting a human being they'd just assaulted. "Got another one claiming to be important," Brennan said with a chuckle. "Last week some guy said he was the mayor's cousin." "Remember that lady who said she was a neurosurgeon?" Reynolds snorted. "Turned out she had 3 warrants. Marcus remained silent. Speaking would be pointless. They weren't interested in who he was. They'd already decided. The station was a squat brick building that Marcus had driven past 100 times without really seeing it. Now he was seeing it from the inside, from the perspective of the accused, the arrested, the presumed guilty. They pulled him from the car, roughly hands tight on his arms. Marcus straightened his back, refusing to let them see him broken. Inside the booking area hummed with mundane efficiency. A heavy-set sergeant with thinning hair sat behind a desk, barely looking up from his computer screen. "Got a gas station loiterer who matches the Wawa robbery suspect," Brennan announced. "Claims he's a judge." The sergeant finally looked up, his eyes scanning Marcus with practiced disinterest before returning to his screen. "Name, Marcus Holloway." Marcus let his courtroom voice come through the tone that made lawyers pause mid-sentence and witnesses choose their words carefully. "I am a judge with the Philadelphia County Court of Common Pleas, and I demand my phone call immediately." The sergeant's expression didn't change. "Sure you are. Empty your pockets on the counter." I'd like to make my phone call first, as is my right. The sergeant stood up slowly. Look, buddy, this goes a lot smoother if you cooperate. Empty your pockets. We'll take your prints, and then maybe you can make your call. Marcus understood the game. Delay the phone call. Prevent him from contacting anyone who could verify his identity. Hope he gets frustrated and says something they can use against him. I cannot empty my pockets while restrained, Marcus pointed out, keeping his voice level. And I know my rights. I am entitled to a phone call upon booking. Brennan stepped forward, roughly removing the handcuffs. There, now empty your pockets like the sergeant asked. The relief of having the cuffs removed lasted only seconds. Marcus methodically placed his items on the counter: wallet, keys, phone, hospital parking receipt, a half-eaten roll of mints. The sergeant picked up the wallet, flipping it open to examine the driver's license. He rifled through the other cards without comment, even when he came to the judicial identification card with the state seal clearly visible. He set the wallet aside like it was nothing. Take off your belt and shoes, the sergeant instructed. Marcus complied, the cold floor seeping through his socks. Each item removed felt like another piece of his humanity being stripped away. He thought of the countless defendants who'd stood in this exact spot, many without his knowledge of the law, many without resources or connections. How many had been processed through this same dehumanizing system with no one to witness their dignity being eroded? Sergeant. A younger officer approached, coffee cup in hand. He glanced at Marcus, then did a visible double-take. Judge Holloway. The room fell silent. Marcus recognized the young officer, but couldn't place him. Yes, it's Officer Jackson, sir. Darrell Jackson. You gave a lecture at the academy last year, Constitutional Rights During Arrests. He looked around at his colleagues, clearly uncomfortable. Is everything okay here? The sergeant's demeanor shifted. You know this guy Jackson? Yes, sir. He's definitely a judge. I attended his lecture on proper arrest procedures and constitutional protections. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. The sergeant looked back at Marcus's ID, this time examining the judicial card more carefully. His face paled slightly. Officer Jackson stepped closer to the sergeant and whispered something. The sergeant immediately picked up his phone. Captain, you need to come down to booking. Now. The transformation happened fast. Within 3 minutes, Captain William Preston burst into the booking area, his face registering shock when he saw Marcus. Judge Holloway, Preston said, artificial warmth coating every word. There seems to have been a terrible misunderstanding. Marcus met his gaze steadily. Indeed, Captain, a misunderstanding of constitutional rights, proper police procedure, and basic human dignity. Preston's smile faltered. Let's get those items back to you right away. Can I offer you some coffee? Perhaps we can discuss this in my office. No, thank you, Marcus replied coolly. I would prefer to follow proper procedure. I believe I'm entitled to a phone call. Of course. You can use my private line if you prefer. The regular booking phone will be fine, Marcus insisted. I wouldn't want any special treatment. He delivered the words with just enough emphasis to make Preston wince. Through the glass windows of the captain's office, Marcus could see Brennan and Reynolds being summoned inside. Their animated gestures told him everything. They were already constructing their narrative, creating the story that would protect them and the department. Marcus dialed Diane Chen, a fellow judge who handled police misconduct cases. Diane, it's Marcus. I need you to listen carefully. He kept his voice measured as he explained the situation, aware of Officer Jackson hovering nearby, clearly torn between loyalty to his department and respect for Marcus. Don't say anything else. Diane's voice was sharp. Don't sign anything. I'm calling the Chief Justice and the Police Commissioner right now. As Marcus hung up, he watched the station transform around him. Officers were whispering, casting nervous glances his way. The sergeant who'd dismissed his judicial ID was furiously typing at his computer, no doubt documenting everything to protect himself. In the captain's office, the discussion had grown heated. Reynolds was pointing animatically while Brennan stood with arms crossed, his face set in stubborn lines. Preston emerged, his professional smile back in place, but strain showing around his eyes. Judge Holloway, I want to personally apologize for this unfortunate incident. Officers Brennan and Reynolds were responding to a series of robberies in the area and were simply being vigilant. Marcus accepted his belongings, but not the excuse. Vigilance doesn't justify constitutional violations, Captain. As I'm sure you're aware, matching a description requires more specific identifying characteristics than simply black male. Preston's smile tightened. Yes, well, in the heat of the moment, officers must make split-second decisions. And those decisions have consequences, Marcus replied evenly. I'll be declining to sign any statement or waiver. I expect a full report of this incident to be filed unaltered. Before Preston could respond, Officer Jackson approached. Sir, your car is still at the Sunoco station. I'd be happy to give you a ride back. Marcus nodded, grateful for the young officer's integrity. As they prepared to leave, Marcus noticed his phone buzzing with notifications. The gas station video had already been uploaded to social media and was spreading rapidly. By morning, everyone would know what had happened to Judge Marcus Holloway. And unknown to officers Brennan and Reynolds, their actions tonight would have consequences they couldn't possibly imagine. Officer Jackson drove in silence for the first few minutes, his hands tight on the steering wheel. Finally, he spoke. Sir, I want to apologize. You have nothing to apologize for, Marcus said. I work with those guys. I've seen them make stops like that before. I never said anything. Marcus looked at the young officer. You said something tonight. Not soon enough. They pulled into the Sunoco station. Marcus's BMW sat alone under the lights exactly where he'd left it. Mr. Patel came running out. Judge Holloway, I called the courthouse like you asked. I also called my lawyer cousin, and I saved all the security footage. He held up a flash drive. Everything is here, every angle. I won't let them erase this. Marcus took the flash drive, feeling its weight in his palm. Evidence. Irrefutable evidence. Thank you, Mr. Patel. You may have just saved more than me tonight. As Officer Jackson drove away and Marcus stood alone beside his car, his phone rang. It was his wife, Vanessa. I saw the video, she said, her voice tight with controlled fury. Are you hurt? Physically, no. Marcus, I know. He closed his eyes, suddenly exhausted. I know what it is. Come home. The kids are scared. Marcus got into his car, his hands shaking slightly as he started the engine. The drive home took 20 minutes, but it felt like hours. Every police car he saw made his heart rate spike. Every sudden movement in his peripheral vision made him tense. This was what it felt like. This was what his clients felt. This was what every black man in America felt when they saw red and blue lights. He'd known it intellectually. He'd heard the testimonies, read the reports, seen the evidence. But knowing and experiencing were two different things. His house in Chestnut Hill looked the same as always, warm lights glowing in the windows, but Marcus felt different approaching it, changed. The door opened before he could reach for his keys. Jamal stood there, his 17-year-old face tight with anger. Behind him, Zora, 14, with tears on her cheeks. And Vanessa, her lawyer's analytical expression, warring with a wife's concern. Dad? Jamal pulled him into a fierce hug. We saw the video. It's everywhere. Marcus held his son, then his daughter, then his wife. In the living room, the local news played on the television. Grainy cell phone footage of his arrest with the caption, Philadelphia judge arrested at gas station. Are you okay? Zora asked, her voice small. Marcus sat down heavily on the couch, his children pressing close on either side. I'm okay, baby girl. No, you're not, Jamal said. None of us are okay. This is bullshit. Jamal, Vanessa started, but Marcus shook his head. He's right. It is. They sat in silence for a moment, watching the news replay the footage. Marcus saw himself through the camera's eye, saw the moment of impact when Brennan slammed him against the car, saw his own body go limp in compliance. You did everything right, Vanessa said quietly. You identified yourself. You moved slowly. You didn't resist. And it didn't matter, Zora finished. Marcus looked at his daughter, seeing understanding in her eyes that no 14-year-old should have. No, baby. It didn't matter. His phone rang again. Chief Justice Harmon. Marcus, I just saw the news. This is outrageous. I've already called the police commissioner and the mayor. They assure me there will be a full investigation. Thank you, Richard, Marcus replied. I appreciate your support. Of course. Take some time off. I'll reassign your cases for the week. Actually, Marcus said, an idea forming in his mind. I'd prefer to keep my schedule, particularly tomorrow's docket. There was a pause on the line. Are you certain no one would question you taking a few days? I'm certain. More than ever, I need to be on that bench tomorrow. After hanging up, Marcus opened his laptop. The video had gone viral. Hundreds of thousands of views, comments ranging from outrage to the usual racist justifications. Cable news channels had picked up the story. His email inbox was flooded. Interview requests, messages of support from colleagues, angry letters from people who thought he should have just complied better, as if there were a level of compliance that would have prevented this. What are you thinking? Vanessa asked, sitting beside him. Marcus pulled up his docket for the next day. His eyes stopped on one case, a police misconduct hearing originally assigned to Judge Sanderson, who'd called in sick. As the next judge in rotation, it would automatically transfer to Marcus. He clicked on the case file. Complainant Antoine Johnson. Allegations excessive force and racial profiling during a traffic stop. Officers named Thomas Brennan and Kyle Reynolds, the same officers who'd arrested him. Vanessa leaned over to read the screen. Her eyes widened. Marcus? I know. They'll challenge this immediately. Conflict of interest, appearance of impropriety. Let them, Marcus said. I've been researching the precedents. There's no absolute requirement for recusal in this situation. Technically, Vanessa emphasized, but you know what this will look like. Marcus turned to face her. I know exactly what it will look like. It will look like justice. He stayed up until 2 a.m. researching case law, reviewing judicial ethics guidelines, preparing for the arguments he knew would come. The more he read, the more certain he became. Upstairs, he could hear Vanessa checking on the children, her footsteps moving between rooms, taking care of everyone as always. Marcus showered, watching the water circle the drain, wishing it could wash away more than just the physical residue of the evening. In the mirror, he examined his face. A bruise was forming on his cheekbone where it had hit the car. Physical evidence. He thought of all the cases he'd heard over the years. All the black men who'd stood before his bench with similar bruises, similar stories. How many had he truly believed? How many times had he given police the benefit of the doubt? When he finally climbed into bed, Vanessa was still awake. Are you sure about this? She asked. No, Marcus admitted, but I'm going to do it anyway. They're going to come after you hard. Let them. She was quiet for a moment. You know what this means, right? You're not just judging a case. You're putting the entire system on trial. Maybe it's time someone did. Marcus didn't sleep much that night. Every time he closed his eyes, he felt handcuffs on his wrists, tasted blood in his mouth, heard Brennan's voice saying, "They all say that." At 5 a.m, he gave up and went downstairs. Made coffee, reviewed his notes again, put on his running clothes and went for a run through the quiet streets of his neighborhood, past houses where people slept peacefully, untroubled by the fear that their skin color might be a death sentence. Mrs. Abernathy from next door was walking her terrier. She did a double take when she saw him, clearly having seen the news. Judge Holloway, I'm so sorry about what happened. Thank you, Mrs. Abernathy. Those officers should be ashamed. Marcus nodded, appreciating the sentiment, even as he wondered if she understood that it wasn't about 2 bad officers. It was about a system that created them, trained them, rewarded them. By 7, he was showered and dressed in one of his best suits, navy blue, perfectly tailored. He selected a crimson tie, knotting it with practiced precision. In the mirror, he looked every inch the judge. But underneath, he was still the man in the hoodie, face down on a car hood, hands cuffed behind his back. Vanessa came downstairs as he was making breakfast for the kids. You made pancakes. Seemed like a pancake morning. Jamal and Zora appeared still in pajamas. They ate in silence, the weight of everything unsaid hanging over the table. Are you going to be okay today, Dad? Zora finally asked. Marcus looked at his daughter. I'm going to try to make things a little more okay for a lot of people." "What does that mean?" "It means sometimes you get a chance to change things, and when that chance comes, you have to take it." At 8:30, Marcus left for the courthouse. Vanessa walked him to the door. "I'm proud of you," she said, "and terrified for you. That makes two of us." The drive downtown felt longer than usual. Every police car he passed made his breath catch. The trauma was fresh, raw, real. He parked in the judge's lot and entered through the private entrance. The security guards who'd known him for years were unusually solicitous. "Good to see you, Judge Holloway," said Jackson, the senior guard. "Saw the news. Shameful how they treated you." Marcus thanked him and continued to his chambers. The courthouse was buzzing with whispers and side glances. Everyone knew. Everyone had seen. His judicial robe hung on the back of his door, the black fabric suddenly seeming more significant than ever before, a symbol of authority, of justice, of power. Diane Chen entered without knocking. "You should have called me the moment they pulled you over. I was a little busy being arrested. I hear you're taking Sanderson's docket today." She folded her arms. "Including the Abington Township misconduct hearing." "I am." "Marcus, the appearance of conflict is something I've considered carefully," he finished. "I've reviewed the judicial ethics guidelines. There's no technical requirement for recusal." "Technical," she echoed. "The police union will throw a fit." "Let them," Marcus said. "Diane, when was the last time an officer faced real consequences in your courtroom or mine?" She didn't answer immediately. They both knew the statistics. Police misconduct cases rarely resulted in meaningful disciplinary action. "You're walking a fine line," she finally said. "I know, but sometimes justice requires it." Diane studied him for a moment, then nodded. "I'll be in courtroom 3A if you need backup." After she left, Marcus's clerk entered with the day's files. "The Abington Township case has some last-minute filings, Your Honor, and there's been unusual media interest." "Thank you, Sophia. Please make sure court security is prepared." Marcus opened the file. Antoine Johnson, 24 years old, alleging excessive force and racial profiling during a traffic stop 6 months ago. The officers named Thomas Brennan and Kyle Reynolds. He read through the complaint. Johnson's story mirrored his own experience with eerie precision. Vague reason for the stop, immediate aggression, false charges that were later dropped. The Internal Affairs investigation had cleared the officers. No wrongdoing found. Attached were personnel files showing 5 previous complaints against Brennan and 7 against Reynolds. All dismissed or marked unfounded. The pattern was clear to anyone willing to see it. At 9:45, Marcus put on his judicial robe. It felt heavier than usual, or maybe he just felt the weight of what he was about to do. He gathered his files and headed toward the courtroom. The hallway fell silent as he passed court personnel and attorneys watching with undisguised curiosity. Outside courtroom 4B, a crowd had gathered. Reporters with press badges, community activists with buttons and signs, uniformed officers standing in solidarity with their colleagues. The bailiff opened the doors. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Marcus took a moment to observe before entering. Antoine Johnson sat with his public defender at one table, a young man whose body language screamed anxiety and hope. At the other table, officers Brennan and Reynolds conferred with their union attorney. Their backs were to the door. They hadn't seen him yet. Marcus nodded to the bailiff. Time to face what came next. "All rise," the bailiff's voice rang out. "The Court of Common Pleas for Philadelphia County is now in session. The Honorable Judge Marcus Holloway presiding." As Marcus ascended to the bench, he watched recognition dawn on the officers' faces. Brennan froze mid-sentence, his mouth hanging open. Reynolds paled visibly, his eyes darting to his attorney in panic. The union lawyer looked confused by his client's reactions until he connected the judge's name with the viral video. His expression shifted from confidence to concern in seconds. Marcus took his seat, arranging his files with practiced calm despite the electricity in the air. The courtroom was silent, everyone holding their breath. "Be seated," Marcus instructed. As the crowd settled, the tension remained thick enough to cut. Marcus looked directly at Officers Brennan and Reynolds, the same men who had pressed his face against a car just 14 hours earlier. Now they stood before his bench in his courtroom, subject to his authority. Justice Marcus thought works in mysterious ways. "Good morning," he said, his voice steady and authoritative. "We are here in the matter of Johnson versus Abington Township Police Department, a complaint of misconduct and excessive force." He paused, letting the moment settle over everyone present. "Before we proceed, I should acknowledge that I recognize Officers Brennan and Reynolds from a personal encounter last night, which some of you may have seen reported in the media." The courtroom erupted in whispers. The union attorney shot to his feet. "Your Honor, in light of this admission, we respectfully request your immediate recusal from this case." Marcus had been expecting this. He was ready. "Your objection is noted, Counselor. I'll hear formal arguments on that motion momentarily." He turned to Antoine Johnson, seeing his own experience reflected in the young man's eyes. "Mr. Johnson, are you prepared to proceed today?" Johnson nodded, still processing the extraordinary turn of events. Marcus addressed the entire courtroom. "Let me be clear. Justice must not only be done, but must be seen to be done. The question before us is whether I can preside impartially over this matter. I believe I can, but I will hear arguments to the contrary." He nodded to the union attorney. "You may present your motion for recusal." As the attorney approached the podium, Marcus could see Brennan and Reynolds whispering urgently to each other. They looked nothing like the confident, aggressive men from the gas station. Now in their eyes, Marcus saw something he'd witnessed countless times from his bench, the sudden, shocking realization that actions have consequences, and sometimes justice arrives in forms we least expect. The next 2 hours would determine not just the fate of one complaint, but potentially the future of policing in their entire community. Marcus gripped his gavel, feeling its weight. "Let justice be done," he thought, "though the heavens fall." Maxwell Gordon adjusted his silk tie and approached the podium with the practiced confidence of a man who'd won cases he should have lost. The police union's top attorney, he specialized in making complaints disappear, in transforming clear misconduct into reasonable judgment calls. "Your Honor," Gordon began, his voice smooth as expensive whiskey, "the situation before us is unprecedented. You were personally involved in an altercation with my clients less than 24 hours ago. Judicial Canon 3 explicitly requires recusal when a judge's impartiality might reasonably be questioned." Marcus listened without expression, his hands folded on the bench. "Furthermore," Gordon continued, warming to his argument, "you possess personal knowledge of disputed evidentiary facts concerning these officers. This creates an insurmountable conflict of interest. The appearance of impropriety alone necessitates your withdrawal from this case." When Gordon finished, Marcus turned to the other side of the courtroom. "Ms. Rivera, your response to the motion." Gabriela Rivera stood, her worn briefcase and department store suit a stark contrast to Gordon's polished appearance. A public defender who'd been fighting uphill battles her entire career, she looked like someone who'd finally drawn a winning hand. "Your Honor, we oppose the motion for recusal. The incident involving yourself and these officers is a separate matter from our case. If anything, it provides valuable context about officer conduct patterns." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "The judiciary doesn't require recusal merely because a judge has relevant knowledge. By that standard, no judge with experience in criminal law could ever preside over a criminal case. No judge who'd been divorced could hear family law matters." Marcus nodded slightly. "Thank you, Counselor." He turned to the district attorney's table. "Ms. Whitman, as prosecutor, what is your position?" Sandra Whitman rose reluctantly. She was in her 30s, ambitious with political aspirations that didn't include making enemies of the police union. "The Commonwealth takes no position on recusal, Your Honor. We defer to the court's judgment on matters of judicial ethics." The non-answer spoke volumes. The DA's office wouldn't risk alienating law enforcement by supporting Marcus, but they also wouldn't risk looking soft on misconduct by opposing him. Marcus took a moment, though his decision had been made hours earlier after careful research in his home office. "The motion for recusal is denied." Gordon immediately protested. "Your Honor, this is unprecedented. You were personally involved." Marcus raised his hand. "Mr. Gordon, let me be clear. Justice is meant to be blind, but that blindness refers to impartiality, not ignorance. My experience does not disqualify me. Rather, it provides relevant insight into policing practices that may bear directly on this case. He leaned forward slightly. Throughout our judicial history, judges have not recused themselves merely because they possess knowledge relevant to the proceedings. By your logic, a judge who'd experienced medical malpractice should never hear a malpractice case. A judge who'd witnessed discrimination should never hear a discrimination case. That's not how the law works. Gordon opened his mouth to object again, but Marcus continued. The judicial oath requires us to administer justice without respect to persons. It does not require us to administer justice without respect to reality. I am fully capable of separating my personal experience from the facts of this specific case. He turned to the court reporter. Your objection is preserved for the record, counselor. We will proceed with the hearing. Brennan leaned over to whisper urgently to Reynolds, who looked like he might be sick. Marcus caught the tail end of it. This is bullshit. He can't do this. But he could, and he was. Marcus nodded to Rivera. You may call your first witness. The complainant calls Antoine Johnson. A young black man stood from the front row, his movements careful and deliberate. He wore a pressed shirt and tie, his hair freshly cut. As he walked to the witness stand, Marcus saw the same careful presentation he himself had learned early. Look respectable. Give them no excuse. Make yourself as non-threatening as possible. It never seemed to matter. The bailiff swore Johnson in. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? I do. Johnson's voice was quiet but steady. Rivera approached with a legal pad. Mr. Johnson, please state your full name and age for the record. Antoine Jeremiah Johnson. I'm 24 years old. And what is your occupation? I'm a nursing assistant at Temple University Hospital, night shift in the cardiac unit. Marcus watched Brennan's expression. The officer's jaw tightened at this information. It was always harder to dehumanize someone when you learned they spent their nights caring for the sick. Mr. Johnson, Rivera said gently, please tell the court about your encounter with Officers Brennan and Reynolds on March 14th of this year. Johnson took a breath. I was driving home from my shift. It was around 11:30 at night. I work 7 to 11 most nights. I was on Roosevelt Boulevard when I noticed a police car behind me. What did you do when you noticed the police car? I checked my speed. I wasn't speeding. I checked my mirrors, made sure my lights were working. Everything was fine. What happened next? They followed me for about 5 blocks. I started getting nervous, just being followed like that. Then they turned on their lights. Rivera nodded. And did you pull over immediately? Yes, ma'am. Soon as it was safe, I pulled into a parking lot. I put the car in park, turned off the engine, kept my hands on the wheel where they could see them. Marcus noticed Reynolds shifting uncomfortably in his seat. Johnson's description matched the textbook response, exactly what every black parent taught their children to do during traffic stops. What happened when the officers approached your vehicle? Johnson's voice tightened slightly. Officer Brennan came to my window. He had his flashlight in my face real bright. Didn't say good evening or anything, just license and registration. Did he tell you why you'd been stopped? No, ma'am. So I asked. I said, Officer, can you tell me why I'm being pulled over? That's when he got angry. Gordon stood. Objection. The witness is characterizing the officer's emotional state. Sustained, Marcus said. Mr. Johnson, please describe what the officer did or said, not what you interpreted his emotions to be. Johnson nodded. Officer Brennan said, don't give me attitude. License and registration. Now. His voice was loud, and he leaned closer to the window. What did you do? I said, yes, sir. My license is in my wallet in my back pocket. My registration is in the glove compartment. I'm going to reach for them now slowly. I'd learned that from a video online. Always tell them what you're doing. Marcus saw his son's face in his mind. Jamal, 17, who'd watched the same videos, learned the same survival techniques that shouldn't be necessary in America. Did Officer Brennan acknowledge your statement? He just kept the flashlight in my eyes. I reached very slowly for my wallet. That's when Officer Reynolds came to the passenger window and shined his light inside the car. He asked where I was coming from. What did you tell him? I said I was coming from work at the hospital. I showed them my work ID badge that was clipped to my shirt. Officer Brennan looked at it and said, "What were you really doing out here?" Rivera paused, letting that sink in. He questioned whether you were actually coming from work, despite seeing your hospital ID. "Yes, ma'am." I said, "Sir, I just showed you my work badge. I've been at the hospital since 7 o'clock. He said, "You got a smart mouth. Get out of the car." "Did he give you a reason for ordering you out of the vehicle?" "He said he smelled marijuana. I told him I don't use drugs. I can't. I work in healthcare. We get random drug tests." Marcus made a note. The phantom smell of marijuana had become the most popular excuse for warrantless searches impossible to disprove, used disproportionately against minorities. "What happened next, Mr. Johnson?" Johnson's composure cracked slightly. Officer Brennan opened my door and grabbed my arm. He pulled me out of the car, hard, spun me around, pushed me against the hood. I said, "Sir, I'm not resisting. Please don't hurt me." That's when he said I was resisting arrest. "Were you resisting?" "No, ma'am. I went completely limp. I've seen the videos of what happens when they say you're resisting. I wasn't moving at all." Rivera walked to her table and picked up a tablet. "Your Honor, I'd like to play body camera footage from Officer Reynolds's camera." Gordon jumped up. "Objection. This footage was provided during discovery, but the defense maintains that it doesn't show the complete picture." "You'll have opportunity to present your version," Marcus said. "Objection overruled. Play the footage." The courtroom fell silent as the video played on the monitors. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m. March 14th. The footage showed Antoine Johnson's car from behind brake lights glowing as he pulled into a parking lot. The camera approached the vehicle. Johnson's hands were visible on the steering wheel through the rear window. Brennan's voice came through clearly on the audio. "License and registration." "Officer, can you tell me why I'm being pulled over?" Johnson's voice was polite, even deferential. "Don't give me attitude. License and registration. Now." The camera angle shifted as Reynolds moved to the passenger side. Johnson's hands moved slowly, deliberately reaching for his wallet. "Where are you coming from?" Reynolds' voice asked. "From work at the hospital, sir. Here's my work ID." There was a pause. Then Brennan's voice heavy with suspicion. "What were you really doing out here?" "Sir, I just showed you my work badge. I've been at the hospital since 7 o'clock. "You got a smart mouth. Get out of the car." "Sir, can you tell me why?" "I smell marijuana. Get out of the vehicle." "Officer, I don't use drugs. I work in healthcare. We get drug tested." The footage shook as Reynolds moved quickly. The camera captured Brennan opening Johnson's door, the sudden motion as Johnson was pulled from the vehicle. "I'm not resisting, sir. Please don't hurt me." Johnson's voice was high with fear. "Stop resisting," Brennan shouted, though the footage showed Johnson's body going completely limp. The camera captured Johnson being pushed against the hood, his arms wrenched behind his back. His face visible in profile showed terror. Then the footage cut to black. The timestamp read 11:51 p.m. Rivera paused the video. Officer Reynolds's body camera allegedly malfunctioned at this point, conveniently at the exact moment Mr. Johnson was being handcuffed and searched. She turned to Johnson. "What happened after the camera stopped recording?" "They searched my car, every inch of it, pulled out my gym bag, my lunch bag, my books from school. I'm taking online classes at community college. They went through everything, found nothing. No marijuana. No, ma'am, nothing illegal at all." "What happened after they searched your car?" Officer Brennan said I'd been driving erratically, that I'd run a stop sign. I told him there wasn't a stop sign where he pulled me over. He said I was arguing with him, and that constituted disorderly conduct. He arrested me for disorderly conduct and resisting arrest. Rivera pulled up a document on the screen. "This is the traffic citation and arrest report. It says you were stopped for running a stop sign at the intersection of Roosevelt and Adams. Mr. Johnson, is there a stop sign at that intersection?" "No, ma'am. I drive that route every single night. There's no stop sign there." Rivera pulled up another image, a street view photo clearly showing the intersection with no stop sign visible. "Your Honor, this is a current photograph of the intersection in question." Gordon stood again. "Objection. Perhaps there was a stop sign at the time that has since been removed." Rivera was ready. I have photographs from the City Traffic Department database dating back 3 years. No stop sign has ever been present at this intersection. She turned back to Johnson. What happened after you were arrested? They took me to the station, kept me there for 6 hours. Finally, they let me go. Said they were releasing me on my own recognizance. The charges were dropped 2 days later. Did you file a complaint? Yes, ma'am. Soon as I got home, I filed a complaint with Internal Affairs. They investigated for 3 months and said they found no evidence of wrongdoing. Rivera nodded slowly. No evidence of wrongdoing despite body camera footage showing you were completely compliant, despite the false stop sign citation, despite the phantom marijuana smell that led to nothing. That's what they told me. Said the officers were just doing their jobs. Marcus watched the jury of public opinion in the gallery. Community members were shaking their heads. Even some of the uniformed officers in the back looked uncomfortable. Rivera walked back to her table. No further questions, Your Honor. Gordon stood buttoning his suit jacket. His cross-examination would be crucial. He approached with a sympathetic expression that Marcus recognized as calculated strategy. Mr. Johnson, I'm sorry you had this experience. Truly. But I need to ask you some questions to clarify a few things. Is that all right? Yes, sir. You said you were nervous when the police car followed you. Why were you nervous if you hadn't done anything wrong? Rivera stood. Objection. The question assumes facts, not in evidence. I'll rephrase, Gordon said smoothly. Mr. Johnson, you testified you were nervous. Had you had negative experiences with police before? Johnson hesitated. I've been stopped before, yes. How many times? I don't know exactly. Maybe 6 or 7 times in the past few years. And were you ever arrested during these stops? No, sir. They always let me go. I've never been charged with anything. Gordon pounced. So you have a history of interactions with law enforcement where you were stopped but released. Doesn't that suggest the officers had legitimate reasons for stopping you? Marcus leaned forward. Counselor, that's argumentative. Ask your question properly. Gordon nodded. Mr. Johnson, isn't it possible that in all these stops, including this one, the officers simply had reasonable suspicion based on legitimate factors? Johnson's voice was quiet but firm. No, sir, it's not possible. Because in every single stop, including this one, I was told I matched a description or my driving seemed suspicious or I was in a high crime area. And in every single stop, I was released without charges because I hadn't done anything wrong. But officers have to make split-second decisions. They had 6 blocks to watch me drive normally before they pulled me over. Johnson interrupted. That's not split-second. That's following a black man in a nice car and looking for a reason. Gordon's expression hardened. Mr. Johnson, are you alleging that these officers racially profiled you? I'm not alleging it, sir. I'm stating it as fact. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Marcus let it continue for a moment before raising his hand for silence. Gordon tried another angle. Mr. Johnson, you said you went completely limp when Officer Brennan pulled you from the car. But isn't it true that the reason you did that was because you were trained to do so, that you'd watched videos teaching people how to make police interactions look bad on camera? Johnson stared at him. I went limp because I didn't want to die, sir. I've seen the videos of what happens to black men who move wrong. I've seen the funerals. Going limp isn't strategy. It's survival. The raw honesty of the statement hit the courtroom like a thunderclap. Even Gordon seemed momentarily at a loss for words. No further questions, he finally said, returning to his seat. Rivera stood again. Redirect, Your Honor. Mr. Johnson, in all those previous stops you mentioned, how many times did the officers provide a specific articulable reason for the stop that proved to be accurate? Never. Not once. Thank you. No further questions. As Johnson returned to his seat, Marcus saw the young man's hands shaking. The testimony had cost him something the reliving of trauma always did. Rivera called her next witness. The complainant calls David Martinez. A middle-aged Hispanic man approached the stand. After being sworn in, Rivera established that he'd been a customer at the gas station across from where Johnson was stopped. Mr. Martinez, did you witness the traffic stop in question?
Yes, ma'am. I was putting air in my tires when I saw the police lights. I watched the whole thing. Please describe what you saw. The young man, Mr. Johnson, he did everything right. He pulled over quick, kept his hands where they could see them.
But those officers, they were aggressive from the start. One of them was yelling before he even got to the window. Could you hear what was being said? Some of it. The officer kept asking where he'd been, what he was doing. The young man was polite, kept saying yes, sir, and no, sir. But the officer seemed angry that he was asking questions. What happened when Mr. Johnson was removed from the vehicle?
Martinez shook his head. They pulled him out hard, threw him against the car. He wasn't fighting. His body just went loose, like he was trying not to give them any excuse, but they kept yelling that he was resisting. Did you see anything that would justify the officer's actions?
No, ma'am. I've seen a lot of traffic stops. I'm a truck driver. I see police interactions all the time. This was wrong. That young man was scared cooperating, and they treated him like he'd done something terrible.
Gordon's cross-examination was brief and ineffective.
Martinez was unshakable in his account. Rivera's next witness was Dr. Patricia Washington, a data analyst who'd studied traffic stop patterns in the Philadelphia area. Gordon objected to her testimony as irrelevant, but Marcus overruled him. Pattern and practice evidence is admissible to show systemic behavior. Marcus ruled, the witness may testify. Dr. Washington presented statistical analysis that painted a damning picture. In predominantly white neighborhoods, officers made stops based on specific traffic violations, with vehicle and driver descriptions documented. In minority neighborhoods, stops were more frequent and based on vague justifications like suspicious behavior or high crime area. The data shows that black drivers in this jurisdiction are 5 times more likely to be stopped than white drivers, Dr. Washington testified. When controlling for actual traffic violations, the disparity increases to 7 times. And in cases where the stop results in no citation or arrest, black drivers are represented at 10 times the rate of white drivers.
What does that suggest? Rivera asked.
It suggests that a significant number of stops of black drivers have no legitimate law enforcement purpose. They are investigatory stops, fishing expeditions based on racial profiling rather than probable cause. Gordon objected repeatedly, but the numbers spoke for themselves. Marcus allowed the testimony, watching Brennan and Reynolds grow increasingly agitated. During a brief recess, Marcus noticed Brennan and Reynolds conferring urgently with Gordon. The attorney kept shaking his head, clearly refusing whatever they were suggesting. When court resumed, Rivera called a witness that made Gordon's face go pale. The complainant calls Officer Darrell Jackson. The young officer who'd recognized Marcus at the police station walked to the stand with visible reluctance. He was in full uniform, his movements stiff with tension. After being sworn in, Jackson sat with his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Officer Jackson, Rivera began gently. How long have you been with the Abington Township Police Department? 14 months, ma'am. Are you acquainted with Officers Brennan and Reynolds? Yes, ma'am. We work the same precinct. During your time on the force, have you had occasion to observe their conduct during traffic stops? Jackson's eyes flicked to Brennan and Reynolds, then away. Yes, ma'am. Please describe what you've observed. Jackson took a breath. They make a lot of stops, more than most officers, especially in certain neighborhoods. Which neighborhoods? South and East Side mostly, predominantly black and Latino areas. Have you observed the reasons given for these stops? Jackson hesitated. Gordon was on his feet. Your Honor, this is speculation about incidents not before this court. It goes to pattern and practice, Rivera countered. The witness has direct observational knowledge. Marcus considered. I'll allow it, but keep it relevant to the stop in question. Rivera turned back to Jackson. Officer Jackson, have you received any training on what constitutes reasonable suspicion for a traffic stop? Yes, ma'am, at the academy and through department training. And what were you taught? That we need specific, articulable facts that would lead a reasonable officer to suspect criminal activity or a traffic violation. Have you observed Officers Brennan and Reynolds applying this standard in their stops? Jackson's voice dropped. Not always, no. Can you be more specific?
Sometimes the reasons given in reports don't match what actually happened, or the reasons are so vague they could apply to anyone. Did you ever raise these concerns? I mentioned it to my training officer once. He told me that Brennan and Reynolds were senior officers with good arrest records, and I should focus on my own work. Rivera nodded. Officer Jackson, do you know what happened to Judge Holloway last night? Yes, ma'am. I was at the station when he was brought in. And who brought him in? Officers Brennan and Reynolds. The courtroom stirred. Gordon stood again. Your Honor, we object to any testimony about an incident not part of these proceedings. Marcus met Gordon's eyes. The objection is noted but overruled. The witness may answer questions about his observations. Rivera continued. Officer Jackson, what reason did Officers Brennan and Reynolds give for stopping Judge Holloway? They said he matched the description of a robbery suspect. What was that description? Jackson looked down. Black male, medium build, wearing a hoodie. How many men in Philadelphia would match that description? Thousands, ma'am. Did Judge Holloway match any more specific descriptors? Height, weight, age, facial features? Not that I heard mentioned, no. What happened when Judge Holloway identified himself? They didn't believe him at first. They proceeded with the arrest even after he told them he was a judge. When did they realize their mistake? Not until I recognized him at the station. I'd attended one of his lectures at the Academy on constitutional rights during arrests. The irony was not lost on anyone in the courtroom. Rivera paused, letting that sink in. Officer Jackson, in your professional opinion, did Officers Brennan and Reynolds have reasonable suspicion to stop Judge Holloway last night? Gordon objected, but Marcus allowed the question. Jackson's training and direct observation made him qualified to offer the opinion. No, ma'am, Jackson said quietly, not based on what I observed. And in your professional opinion, did they have reasonable suspicion to stop Antoine Johnson? Jackson looked at Johnson, then at his fellow officers. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. No, ma'am, I don't believe they did. The silence in the courtroom was absolute. Rivera finished her questioning, and Gordon approached for cross-examination, like a man walking to the gallows. Officer Jackson, you're a rookie, correct? Only 14 months on the force. Yes, sir. Is it possible that your inexperience prevents you from recognizing the subtle factors that senior officers like Brennan and Reynolds pick up on? It's possible, sir, but the academy training was clear about what constitutes reasonable suspicion. What I've observed doesn't match what I was taught. Gordon tried several more angles, but Jackson held firm. Finally, Gordon sat down his cross-examination, having done more harm than good. As Jackson stepped down from the witness stand, Brennan leaned over and whispered something harsh. Jackson kept his eyes forward, but his jaw tightened. Marcus called for a 15-minute recess. As the courtroom emptied, he sat alone on the bench reviewing his notes. The case against the officers was stronger than he'd anticipated. But Rivera had one more witness that could either solidify her case or complicate it immeasurably. That witness was Marcus himself. When the recess ended, Rivera stood and made an announcement that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to call you as a witness to testify about your encounter with Officers Brennan and Reynolds. Gordon shot to his feet so fast, his chair scraped loudly against the floor. Absolutely not. Your Honor cannot be both judge and witness in the same proceeding. This violates every principle of judicial ethics. Marcus had anticipated. This moment had spent hours the previous night researching the precedents and procedures. Mr. Gordon is correct that the situation is highly unusual. Therefore, I'm going to request that Judge Diane Chen temporarily preside while I give testimony. After my testimony concludes, I'll resume my role as judge for the remainder of the proceedings. Gordon's face reddened. Your Honor, this is absurd. You're manipulating procedure to insert yourself into a case where you have a clear conflict of interest. I'm following established procedure for handling unusual circumstances, Marcus replied calmly. Judge Chen is available and willing to preside during my testimony, unless you're suggesting that my constitutional rights as a citizen should be ignored simply because I'm a judge. The question hung in the air. Gordon had no good answer. If he argued that Marcus shouldn't testify, he'd be arguing that judges forfeit their rights when they're victimized. If he accepted the testimony, he'd have to cross-examine a respected jurist about being racially profiled.
The court will recess for 30 minutes while Judge Chen is brought in, Marcus announced, striking his gavel. In his chambers, Marcus removed his robe with hands that trembled slightly. Diane Chen arrived within 20 minutes, her expression grave. "Are you absolutely certain about this?" she asked. "No," Marcus admitted, "but it's necessary. The appeals court is going to have a field day with this. Let them. Sometimes the right thing and the legal thing have to be the same thing even when it's uncomfortable." Diane put on her robe and Marcus put on his suit jacket. The transformation was surreal. One moment he was the arbiter of justice, the next he was just another witness, just another black man with a story about police misconduct. When they returned to the courtroom, the bailiff made the announcement. "All rise, the Honorable Judge Diane Chen presiding." Marcus took a seat in the gallery next to Rivera, while Diane ascended to the bench. The reversal of roles felt like stepping into an alternate reality. "Please call your witness," Diane instructed. Rivera stood. "The complainant calls Judge Marcus Holloway." Marcus walked to the witness stand, raised his right hand, and was sworn in by a bailiff who'd worked with him for 15 years. The man's voice shook slightly as he administered the oath. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" "I do." Marcus sat in the witness chair, a position he'd never occupied in his own courtroom. From this angle, the bench looked higher, more imposing. He understood suddenly why witnesses sometimes seemed intimidated. Rivera approached with a legal pad, though Marcus suspected she'd memorized every question. "Please state your name and occupation for the record." "Marcus Holloway. I'm a judge with the Philadelphia County Court of Common Pleas." "Judge Holloway, can you describe your encounter with Officers Brennan and Reynolds on the evening of November 20th? Marcus took a breath, centering himself. "I had spent the day at Jefferson Hospital with my mother who'd undergone heart surgery. I left the hospital around 9:30 p.m. and stopped at the Sunoco station on Roosevelt Boulevard to get gas." "What were you wearing?" "Jean sneakers and a navy blue hoodie. I'd dressed casually for the long day at the hospital." "What happened when you arrived at the gas station?" "I pulled up to pump 3, swiped my credit card, and began fueling my vehicle. That's when I noticed a police cruiser circling the station perimeter." "What did you do when you noticed the police car?" "I remained at my vehicle and continued pumping gas. I didn't make eye contact or do anything that could be construed as suspicious." "What happened next?" Marcus met Brennan's eyes across the courtroom. The officer looked away first. The cruiser pulled in directly behind my vehicle, blocking me in. Officers Brennan and Reynolds exited and approached me. "Did you speak to them?" "Yes." I said, "Good evening, officers. Something I can help you with." What was their response? Officer Brennan told me they'd had reports of suspicious activity in the area and asked what I was doing there. I explained that I was getting gas on my way home from the hospital where my mother had surgery. Did they accept that explanation? No. Officer Brennan demanded my identification. I asked why, since I was simply purchasing fuel. He stated that I matched the description of a robbery suspect. Rivera paused. Did he provide any specific details about this description? No. When I asked what the description was beyond blackmail, Officer Brennan became agitated. Officer Reynolds stepped closer and told me I needed to comply immediately. What did you do? Marcus's voice remained steady, but the memory made his chest tight. I told them I was reaching for my wallet. I moved slowly and deliberately. I stated clearly that my name was Marcus Holloway and that I was a judge with the Philadelphia County Court of Common Pleas. I told them my judicial ID was in my wallet. What was Officer Brennan's response? He laughed. He said, "Sure you are, and I'm the police commissioner." Before I could retrieve my wallet to show him my identification, he grabbed my arm and slammed me face first against my vehicle. The courtroom was silent, except for the court reporter's fingers on the keyboard. What happened after Officer Brennan pushed you against your vehicle? He wrenched my arms behind my back and handcuffed me. I told him repeatedly that this was unnecessary, that my judicial ID was in my wallet, that this was a mistake. He ignored everything I said. Officer Reynolds began searching my pockets without my consent and without stating a legal basis for the search. Were there witnesses? Yes, the gas station manager, Mr. Patel, came out and told the officers that he knew me, that I was a regular customer and a judge. A woman at another pump also called out asking if the force was necessary. Both were told to stay back or they'd be charged with interfering. What happened after you were handcuffed? They put me in the back of their patrol car and transported me to the Abington Township Police Station. During the drive, Officers Brennan and Reynolds joked about people who claimed to be important. They treated the entire incident as if it were amusing. Rivera's voice softened. What was going through your mind during this experience? Marcus allowed himself a moment of honesty. I was thinking about all the cases I'd heard over the years. All the black men who'd stood before my bench with similar stories. I was thinking about my son who's 17 and how I'd given him instructions on how to survive police encounters. I was thinking that I'd followed every rule, done everything right, and it didn't matter. What happened when you arrived at the police station? I was taken to the booking area. The booking sergeant asked my name. I identified myself again as Judge Marcus Holloway and requested my phone call. He told me to empty my pockets first. When I reminded him of my right to a phone call, he became dismissive. Did he examine your identification? Yes. He looked through my wallet, including my judicial identification card with the state seal clearly visible. He set it aside without comment and ordered me to remove my belt and shoes. Did anyone at the station recognize you? Yes, Officer Darrell Jackson, who'd attended a lecture I gave at the police academy on constitutional rights during arrests. When he recognized me and confirmed my identity, the entire atmosphere changed. How so? Captain Preston was summoned immediately. He arrived and suddenly became very solicitous, offering coffee, wanting to discuss the matter in his office. But by then the damage was done. I'd been profiled, assaulted, falsely arrested, and processed like a criminal for no reason other than the color of my skin. Rivera let the words settle. Judge Holloway, in your professional capacity, you've presided over countless cases involving police conduct. Based on your experience and knowledge of the law, did Officers Brennan and Reynolds have reasonable suspicion to stop you? Gordon objected. The witness, despite his position, is offering a legal conclusion about his own case. Diane Chen considered. The objection is overruled. Judge Holloway's legal expertise makes him uniquely qualified to offer this opinion. He may answer. Marcus chose his words carefully. No. They did not have reasonable suspicion. A vague description of black male medium billed wearing a hoodie could apply to hundreds of thousands of men in Philadelphia. Without additional specific identifying characteristics, physical features, or behavior that suggested criminal activity, there was no constitutional basis for the stop. Did their conduct during the stop comply with proper police procedure? No. They used excessive force without justification, conducted a search without consent or probable cause, and ignored my clear identification of myself and my request to verify my identity before escalating the situation. Rivera nodded. No further questions, Your Honor. Gordon stood, and Marcus could see the calculation in the attorney's eyes. Cross-examining a judge about being racially profiled was a minefield. Judge Holloway, Gordon began carefully, you've stated that you were wearing a hoodie and casual clothing. Isn't it possible that Officers Brennan and Reynolds simply didn't recognize you out of your usual professional attire? That's precisely the point, Mr. Gordon. They didn't recognize me as a judge because they never looked beyond my skin color and clothing. They made an assumption based on race and appearance, not on behavior or articulable facts. Gordon tried another angle. But you acknowledged that there had been robberies in the area. Weren't the officers simply being vigilant? Vigilance requires reasonable suspicion based on specific facts. Stopping every black man in the area is not vigilance. It's racial profiling. Judge Holloway, isn't it true that if you'd simply shown them your identification immediately, this entire situation could have been avoided? Marcus felt anger flash through him, but kept his voice level. Mr. Gordon, I attempted to show them my identification. I told them repeatedly who I was. They chose not to believe me. The burden is not on citizens to prove their innocence. The burden is on law enforcement to have legitimate reasons for stops and to conduct themselves professionally. Gordon pressed on. But if you'd been more cooperative— I was completely cooperative, Marcus interrupted.
I remained calm. I moved slowly. I verbalized every action. I identified myself clearly. What you're suggesting is that there's some level of cooperation that would have prevented this. But we both know that's not true, because the problem wasn't my behavior. The problem was their perception of me as a threat based solely on my race. Gordon fell silent for a moment. Marcus had just articulated the central issue in a way that was impossible to rebut. "No further questions," Gordon finally said, returning to his seat. Rivera stood. "Redirect your honor. Judge Holloway, you mentioned giving your son instructions on how to survive police encounters. What did those instructions include?" "Keep your hands visible at all times. Don't make sudden movements. Say yes, sir, and no, sir. Ask permission before reaching for anything. Stay calm even if the officers become aggressive. Get badge numbers if possible. And pray that compliance is enough." "Did you follow those instructions during your encounter with Officers Brennan and Reynolds?" "Yes, every single one of them." "Did following those instructions prevent you from being assaulted and falsely arrested?" "No, it did not." Rivera's voice carried through the courtroom. "What does that teach your children about justice in America?" Gordon objected, but Diane overruled him. Marcus was allowed to answer. "It teaches them that we can do everything right and still be seen as criminals. It teaches them that some people will always see their skin color before they see their humanity. And it teaches them that changing this reality requires more than compliance. It requires confronting the system itself." As Marcus finished his testimony and returned to Rivera's table, he saw tears on some faces in the gallery. Antoine Johnson was crying silently. Several of the community activists had their hands over their mouths. Diane Chen called for another recess. Marcus and Diane switched places again, and when Marcus retook the bench in his judicial robes, he felt the weight of what had just happened. He'd crossed a line that few judges ever crossed, using his authority to challenge the very system he was part of. When court resumed, Rivera called one more witness that no one had expected. The complainant calls Mr. Raj Patel. The gas station manager walked nervously to the stand, clutching a manila folder. After being sworn in, he sat on the edge of the chair. "Mr. Patel," Rivera began, "you own the Sunoco station where Judge Holloway was arrested, correct?" "Yes, ma'am, for 8 years now." "Do officers, Brennan and Reynolds, frequent your station?" "Yes, almost every night. They get coffee, sometimes food. I see them often." "Have you observed their interactions with customers?" Gordon objected. "This is irrelevant to Mr. Johnson's case." Marcus leaned forward. "I'll allow limited testimony to establish pattern and practice. Mr. Patel, please answer only about what you've directly observed." Patel nodded. "I've seen them question many customers, especially young Black and Hispanic men. They ask where they're going, where they've been, what they're doing. It happens a lot." "Have you ever witnessed them making stops without apparent cause?" "Many times. Young Black men come to my station just to buy gas or snacks, and these officers question them like they're criminals." Rivera opened her folder. "Mr. Patel, you mentioned that you saved security footage. What footage did you save?" "After what happened to Judge Holloway, I checked all my cameras. I keep footage for 2 weeks for insurance. I found something I thought the court should see." Gordon was on his feet. "Your Honor, this is ambush testimony. We had no notice of additional footage." "Mr. Patel only came forward this morning," Rivera said. "I informed Mr. Gordon before court resumed." Marcus considered. "I'll review the footage first. If it's relevant, we'll view it in open court. Mr. Gordon will have opportunity to respond." Patel handed over a USB drive. Marcus had his clerk load it onto the courtroom computer. What he saw made his jaw tighten. The footage showed Officers Brennan and Reynolds at the Sunoco station timestamp reading 10:42 p.m. on March 14th, approximately 1 hour before they stopped Antoine Johnson. They were standing by their cruiser coffee cups in hand, clearly visible in the overhead camera's range. The audio was faint, but audible when the clerk enhanced it. Brennan's voice came through. "We need 2 more stops to hit quota this month," Reynolds responded. "Let's swing through the south side. Always good for a few stops there. That kid last week tried to file a complaint. Captain said it got dismissed."
They always get dismissed. Just use the right words in the report. Furtive movements match descriptions suspected drug activity. That's all it takes." They both laughed. The timestamp showed they left the station at 10:47 p.m. Antoine Johnson's stop occurred at 11:47 p.m., exactly 1 hour later, in the Southside neighborhood they'd discussed targeting. Marcus played the footage for the courtroom. The silence was deafening. When it finished, Marcus looked at Brennan and Reynolds. Both men had gone pale, Reynolds especially. The casual admission of racial profiling, quota-seeking, and systematic complaint dismissal was undeniable. Gordon stood slowly. "Your Honor, I need to confer with my clients." 15-minute recess, Marcus announced. During the break, Marcus saw Gordon in heated discussion with Brennan and Reynolds in the hallway. Through the glass, he could see Reynolds shaking his head repeatedly, his face in his hands. Brennan was gesturing angrily, but Reynolds kept backing away. When court resumed, Gordon's confidence had evaporated. "Your Honor, Officer Reynolds has requested to make a statement to the court." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "This is highly irregular. What kind of statement?" Reynolds stood. His voice was barely audible. "Your Honor, I need to tell the truth about what happened." Brennan grabbed his arm. "Don't say another word. Our union attorney will handle this." Reynolds shook him off. "No, I'm done. I'm done lying. I'm done watching the system protect us when we're wrong." He turned to Marcus. "Your Honor, may I approach?" Gordon tried to intervene, but Reynolds was already walking toward the bench. "Your Honor, everything Mr. Johnson said was true. Everything Judge Holloway said was true. We had no legitimate reason to stop either of them. We profiled them based on race." The courtroom erupted. Marcus gavelled for silence. "Officer Reynolds, I strongly advise you to consult with your attorney before making any further statements. I don't need an attorney to tell me what I already know is right." Reynolds turned to face Antoine Johnson. I'm sorry for what we did to you. There was no stop sign. There was no marijuana smell. We stopped you because you were a young black man in a nice car, and we needed to meet our quota. That's the truth." Gordon was frantically trying to stop Reynolds, but the officer continued. "It's not just us. It's the whole department. We're trained to use certain language in reports. Furtive movements, matched a description, high crime area. They're code words that justify stops without real suspicion. We're rewarded for being aggressive in minority neighborhoods. Officers who make the most stops get better evaluations, better assignments, faster promotions." He turned back to Marcus. "What happened to you last night? Judge Holloway happens every day. The only difference is you had the power to make people listen. Most people don't. Most people get processed through the system and nobody cares because nobody with power sees them as human." Marcus sat back processing this unprecedented moment. A police officer was voluntarily admitting to systematic racial profiling and departmental corruption in open court. "Officer Reynolds, do you understand that your statement may be used against you in criminal proceedings?" "Yes, sir. I understand. I don't care anymore. I'm tired of being part of the problem." Brennan exploded from his seat. "You're throwing away your career. You're throwing me under the bus for what? For these people." The phrase hung in the air. These people. The mask had slipped completely. Marcus's voice was ice. "Officer Brennan, sit down." But Brennan was beyond reason. "This is ridiculous. We were doing our jobs. If people would just comply instead of always making everything about race, none of this would happen. They want special treatment. They want to break the law without consequences." "Officer Brennan, I'm ordering you to sit down and be silent." "No." Brennan's face was red veins bulging in his neck. "I'm sick of this. We put our lives on the line every day, and for what to be accused of racism because we're trying to keep communities safe, to be second-guessed by judges who've never walked a beat." He pointed at Marcus. "You think wearing that robe makes you better than us? You think because you're a judge, we're supposed to just know who you are? You were dressed like a thug. You were in a high-crime area at night. We had every right to stop you and everyone like you." Everyone like you. The words echoed through the courtroom. Marcus let Brennan's outburst continue for another moment, giving him enough rope to hang himself thoroughly. When he finally spoke, his voice carried absolute authority. Officer Brennan, you are in contempt of this court. Bailiff, remove him from the courtroom. As bailiffs moved toward Brennan, he continued shouting, "This is a setup. This whole thing is rigged. You're all protecting each other because you're all—" The bailiffs escorted him out before he could finish the sentence, but everyone knew what he'd been about to say. In the wake of Brennan's explosion, the courtroom sat in stunned silence. Reynolds remained standing, tears streaming down his face. Gordon looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Marcus turned to Reynolds. "Officer Reynolds, please be seated. We'll address your statement shortly." He looked at Gordon. "Does your client wish to invoke his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination?" Gordon cleared his throat. "Your Honor, I need time to consult with Officer Reynolds about the ramifications of his statement." "Granted. We'll recess until tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. This will give all parties time to consider the significant developments that have occurred today." As people filed out, Marcus remained on the bench. Rivera approached with Antoine Johnson. "Your Honor," Johnson said, his voice thick with emotion, "I never thought anyone would believe me. I never thought it would matter." Marcus looked at the young man who'd had the courage to file a complaint, knowing the system was stacked against him. "It matters, Mr. Johnson. It has always mattered." After the courtroom cleared, Marcus sat alone in the empty space. The silence was profound. In one day, the case had transformed from a simple misconduct hearing into an exposé of systemic racism in law enforcement. Brennan's outburst had revealed the ugly truth that many suspected but few could prove. Reynolds's confession had provided the insider testimony that could dismantle the protective walls around police misconduct, but Marcus knew this was just the beginning. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more resistance, more attempts to minimize and excuse what had been laid bare today. His phone buzzed. A text from Vanessa. "Watching the news. The video of Brennan's outburst is everywhere. Are you okay?" Marcus typed back, "Define okay." She responded immediately, "You're changing things, but I'm scared of what it might cost." Marcus looked up at the empty courtroom, at the seal of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania on the wall, at the words engraved above it, "Equal justice under law." Tomorrow, he would continue the fight to make those words mean something. Tonight, he just needed to go home and remember why the fight mattered in the first place. Marcus arrived home past 8 that evening to find his house filled with people he hadn't expected. His living room had been transformed into an impromptu war room. Vanessa sat with 3 other attorneys from her firm laptops, open legal documents spread across the coffee table. Diane Chen was there too, along with 2 other judges Marcus respected, and surprisingly, the local NAACP chapter president, Reverend James Crawford. "We saw what happened in court," Vanessa said, standing to embrace him, "and we know what's coming." Reverend Crawford approached his handshake firm. "Judge Holloway, what you did today was extraordinary. But the police union, the fraternal order, they're already mobilizing. By tomorrow morning, they'll have talking points, media appearances, political pressure. We need to be ready." Marcus loosened his tie, exhaustion hitting him like a physical weight. "I appreciate this, but I can't coordinate any response. It could compromise the proceedings." "We're not asking you to," said Thomas Rivera, one of Vanessa's colleagues. "We're preparing to support you against what's coming. The union will argue judicial bias misconduct that you orchestrated this entire thing. They'll try to get you removed from the case and possibly disbarred." Marcus sat heavily in his armchair. "Let them try." "Dad." Jamal appeared from the kitchen with Zora behind him. "There are reporters outside, like 20 of them." Through the front window, Marcus could see news vans lining the street, satellite dishes, extended cameras pointed at his house. His quiet neighborhood had become a media circus. "This is what I was afraid of," Vanessa said quietly. "This isn't just about one case anymore. You've become a symbol." "I didn't ask to be a symbol," Marcus replied. "I just want justice." Reverend Crawford sat across from him. "Sometimes we don't choose our moments, brother. The moments choose us. What happened to you at that gas station? What's happening in that courtroom? It's bigger than you now. Every black person in this city, in this country, they're watching. They're finally seeing someone with power willing to use it." Marcus's phone had been buzzing constantly. He'd silenced it hours ago, but now he checked the messages. Hundreds of them. Colleagues offering support, community members sharing their own stories of police misconduct, threats from people who saw him as anti-police, interview requests from every major news outlet. One message stood out. It was from Captain William Preston. "Judge Holloway, we need to talk. Please call me. This has gotten out of control." Marcus showed it to Diane. She read it and shook her head. "Don't respond. Anything you say to him can be used to argue improper ex parte communication." "He's right, though," Marcus said. "It has gotten out of control. The question is whether that's a bad thing." The strategy session continued late into the night. The attorneys mapped out potential legal challenges, prepared responses to anticipated motions, identified expert witnesses who could testify about systemic racism in policing. Reverend Crawford coordinated with community organizations to ensure public support and peaceful demonstrations. Around midnight, everyone finally left. Marcus sat alone with Vanessa in their bedroom, too wired to sleep. "Are you sure about this?" she asked. "Really sure. Because once you issue your ruling tomorrow, there's no going back. You'll have every police union in the country calling for your head. You'll have politicians demanding investigations. Your career could be over." Marcus thought about Antoine Johnson's face when Reynolds apologized. He thought about his own children learning that the system could change. He thought about every black parent who'd had to give their children the talk about surviving police encounters. "My career will survive, or it won't," he said. "But if I don't use whatever power I have to change this, then what was the point of having power at all?" Vanessa took his hand. "Then I'm with you. Whatever happens, we face it together." Marcus finally fell asleep around 2 a.m., but his dreams were troubled. He kept seeing Brennan's twisted face, hearing the words, "these people," and "everyone like you," over and over. His alarm went off at 5:30. Marcus went for a run despite the reporters still camped outside. They shouted questions as he passed cameras flashing, but he kept his eyes forward and his pace steady. When he returned, Jamal was in the kitchen making breakfast. "I want to come to court today," he said. "Jamal, I don't think—" "Dad, please. I need to see how this ends. I need to know that the system can actually work." Marcus looked at his son, seeing the hope and fear warring in his expression. "Okay, but you stay in the gallery. You don't talk to reporters. You don't engage with anyone who tries to start something." "I won't. I just need to be there." They arrived at the courthouse at 8 a.m. to find the crowd had tripled. Supporters held signs reading, "Justice for Judge Holloway" and "End Racial Profiling." Counter-protesters waved thin blue line flags and signs defending police. Officers in uniform stood in formation, a show of solidarity with Brennan and Reynolds. Security was tight. Marcus and his family were escorted through a back entrance while reporters shouted questions and cameras tracked their every move. In his chambers, Marcus found a letter that had been slipped under his door. The handwriting was shaky, clearly written by someone elderly. He opened it. "Dear Judge Holloway, I am 73 years old. My son was killed by police in 1987. They said he matched a description. They said he made furtive movements. They said he should have complied. No one believed us. No one cared. Thank you for caring. Thank you for being brave enough to tell the truth. Whatever happens, you've given us something we haven't had in a long time. Hope. Sincerely, Dorothy Perkins." Marcus folded the letter carefully and placed it in his pocket. He would carry it with him today. At 8:45, there was a knock. Diane Chen entered without waiting for a response. "The police commissioner is here. He's demanding to speak with you before court convenes." "Absolutely not. Any communication needs to be in open court." "That's what I told him. He's threatening to file an emergency appeal with the state Supreme Court to have you removed from the case." Marcus put on his robe. "Let him try." When he entered the courtroom at 9 a.m. sharp, it was packed beyond fire code capacity. Every seat filled, people standing along the walls, more watching on monitors in overflow rooms. The bailiff had to call for order 3 times before the crowd settled. Antoine Johnson sat with Rivera at the plaintiff's table, his entire family behind him in the front row. At the defense table, Gordon sat alone. Reynolds was there, but Brennan was conspicuously absent, still in custody for contempt. "All rise," the bailiff announced, and Marcus took the bench. Before he could speak, Gordon stood. "Your Honor, I have several emergency motions to present before we proceed." "You may present them." Gordon approached with a thick folder. First, a motion for immediate mistrial based on yesterday's events. Officer Brennan's outburst was provoked by the inflammatory nature of these proceedings. Second, a motion to exclude Officer Reynolds' statement, as it was made under duress. Third, a motion to strike all testimony related to your personal experience as irrelevant to Mr. Johnson's case. Marcus had expected all of this. "I'll hear arguments on each motion. Mr. Gordon, you may begin." For the next 40 minutes, Gordon laid out his case. The proceedings had become a circus. Marcus's personal involvement had poisoned the well. Reynolds' statement was inadmissible. The whole hearing needed to be declared void. When Rivera responded, she was succinct. "Your Honor, the only thing inflammatory about these proceedings is the truth. Officer Brennan wasn't provoked. He revealed his true character. Officer Reynolds wasn't under duress. He experienced a crisis of conscience. And your testimony was directly relevant to establishing a pattern of conduct. The defense wants a mistrial because the facts don't support their narrative." Marcus ruled on each motion. "All motions are denied. Officer Brennan's outburst was voluntary and will remain part of the record. Officer Reynolds was given multiple opportunities to consult with counsel and chose to speak freely. And my testimony is relevant to pattern and practice evidence. We will proceed." Gordon sat down heavily. He looked defeated already. "Mr. Gordon," Marcus said, "does your client wish to present any defense witnesses?" Gordon consulted with Reynolds, who shook his head. "No, Your Honor. Officer Reynolds does not wish to present a defense. He stands by his statement from yesterday." This was unprecedented, a police officer in a misconduct hearing essentially admitting guilt and declining to mount any defense. "Very well. Ms. Rivera, do you have additional witnesses?" "Just one, Your Honor. The complainant calls Police Commissioner Frank Hargrove." The commissioner stood from the gallery, his face carefully neutral. As he was sworn in, Marcus could see the calculation in the man's eyes. He was being forced to testify in a case that had become a political nightmare. Rivera didn't waste time. "Commissioner Hargrove, how long have you led the Abington Township Police Department?" 7 years. "During your tenure, how many complaints of racial profiling have been filed against officers in your department?" Hargrove's jaw tightened. "I don't have the exact number memorized." "Would it surprise you to learn that there have been over 200 such complaints in the past 7 years? That number seems high." Rivera pulled up a document on the screen. "This is from your department's own records, obtained through a public records request. 214 complaints alleging racial profiling. How many resulted in disciplinary action?" Hargrove shifted in his seat. "Many complaints are found to be without merit." "How many resulted in disciplinary action, Commissioner?" 3. The number hung in the air. 214 complaints, 3 disciplinary actions. "Less than 2%, Rivera said. "Commissioner, do you believe your department has a problem with racial profiling?" "I believe my department serves a diverse community with professionalism and integrity." "That's not what I asked. Do you believe your department has a problem with racial profiling?" "All police departments deal with allegations that are sometimes unfounded. Commissioner Hargrove," Marcus's voice cut through the evasion, "answer the question, yes or no." Hargrove met Marcus's eyes. "No, I do not believe we have a systemic problem." Rivera pulled up another document. "This is an internal memo from 2021 authored by you. In it, you state, and I quote, 'We need to address concerning patterns in stop data that suggest some officers may be engaging in selective enforcement based on race.'" "Did you write that memo?" Hargrove's face reddened. "That was taken out of context." "So you did write it. What actions did you take to address these concerning patterns?" "We implemented training programs." "What else?" "We reviewed our policies." "Did you discipline any officers? Not based solely on stop data, no. Did you change evaluation criteria that reward high stop numbers?" "Those metrics are important for measuring officer productivity." Rivera turned to Marcus. Your Honor, we've established that the Commissioner acknowledged patterns of racially selective enforcement 3 years ago, but took no meaningful action to address them. I'd like to introduce testimony from other officers about department culture. Gordon objected. These officers aren't parties to this case. They're fact witnesses to systemic practices, Rivera countered. Marcus considered. I'll allow limited testimony, but Ms. Rivera stay focused on facts relevant to this case. Over the next hour, Rivera called 3 more officers. Each testified anonymously, faces digitally obscured, voices altered. They described quotas that weren't officially called quotas. They described coded language in reports. They described explicit instructions to focus on minority neighborhoods. They described a culture where raising concerns meant being labeled a troublemaker. One officer's testimony was particularly damning. I witnessed Officer Brennan stop a black teenager for jaywalking. The kid was crossing mid-block to get to the bus stop. Brennan ran his name searching for warrants or anything to justify the stop. Found nothing. Let the kid go, but kept his information. I asked why he'd stopped him. Brennan said, "Because he's in the system now. Next time something happens in this area, we've got someone to look at." By noon, the testimony had painted a picture of systematic racial profiling so clear that even Gordon had stopped objecting. He knew his case was lost. Marcus called for a lunch recess. In his chambers, he found his children waiting with Vanessa. Jamal's eyes were wet. "Is it always like this?" Jamal asked. "Have you been hearing stories like this for years?" Marcus pulled his son into a hug. "Yes." "Then why hasn't anything changed before now?" "Because changing systems is harder than changing people. Systems protect themselves." "Are you going to change it?" Marcus pulled back to look at his son. "I'm going to try." During lunch, Marcus's phone rang. The caller ID showed Chief Justice Harmon. Marcus answered. "Marcus, I've been fielding calls all morning. The governor's office, the attorney general, the police union. Everyone wants to know what you're going to do." "I'm going to do my job, Richard." "I know. That's what I've been telling them. But I need you to understand the magnitude of what's happening. If you rule against these officers in a way that implicates departmental policies, you're opening the door to hundreds, maybe thousands of appeals. Every case these officers touched, every case involving stops based on vague criteria. The criminal justice system could be overwhelmed." "Then maybe the system needs to be overwhelmed. Maybe it needs to face what it's been ignoring for decades." There was a long pause. "I'm supporting you, Marcus, but I needed you to understand what you're unleashing." "I understand, Richard. Thank you." When court resumed at 1:30, Marcus had made his decision. "Are there any final arguments before I rule?" Gordon stood. "Your Honor, the defense asks the court to remember that police officers make difficult decisions in dangerous circumstances. While mistakes may have occurred, they were made in good faith by officers trying to protect their community." Rivera's response was pointed. "Your Honor, Officer Reynolds himself testified that these weren't mistakes made in good faith. They were deliberate decisions rooted in racial bias and supported by departmental culture. The question isn't whether police work is difficult. The question is whether constitutional rights matter even when police work is difficult." Marcus nodded. "Thank you both. I'm prepared to rule." The courtroom fell silent, every eye fixed on Marcus. In the matter of Antoine Johnson versus Officers Thomas Brennan and Kyle Reynolds, and by extension the Abington Township Police Department, this court finds as follows. Marcus paused, feeling the weight of history pressing down on him. First, the facts. Mr. Johnson was stopped without reasonable suspicion. The stated reason, a traffic violation, was demonstrably false. The escalation to a search was unsupported by probable cause. The arrest on charges of disorderly conduct and resisting arrest was without legal foundation. All charges were subsequently dropped, tacitly acknowledging their illegitimacy. He turned to Reynolds and the absent Brennan's empty chair. Officers Brennan and Reynolds violated Mr. Johnson's Fourth Amendment rights against unreasonable search and seizure and his 14th Amendment rights to equal protection under the law. These violations were not mistakes or errors in judgment. As Officer Reynolds courageously admitted, they were deliberate actions rooted in racial profiling. Gordon started to stand, but Marcus continued. Second, the systemic issues. The evidence presented in this hearing demonstrates that these violations were not isolated incidents. They reflect departmental patterns and practices that encourage, and reward racially selective enforcement. Marcus pulled out statistics from the evidence. Black residents of this community are stopped at 7 times the rate of white residents when controlling for actual violations. Officers who make frequent stops in minority neighborhoods receive better evaluations, despite higher rates of stops that result in no charges. Complaints of racial profiling are systematically dismissed regardless of merit. He looked at Commissioner Hargrove, who sat rigid in the gallery. Leadership acknowledged concerning patterns 3 years ago, but implemented no meaningful reforms. This is not a failure of individual officers. This is a failure of institutional accountability. Marcus could feel the tension in the room escalating with each word. Therefore, this court orders the following remedies. First officers, Brennan and Reynolds, are suspended without pay for 6 months. They must complete comprehensive retraining in constitutional policing and implicit bias recognition. They must pass evaluation by an independent reviewer before returning to duty. He turned to the broader implications. Second, the Abington Township Police Department must implement immediate reforms. All officers will wear body cameras that cannot be manually deactivated during public interactions. Footage will be subject to civilian review. Gordon was shaking his head, but Marcus continued relentlessly. Department performance metrics will be revised to eliminate any evaluation criteria based on stop or arrest numbers. Instead, officers will be evaluated on constitutional compliance, community engagement, and de-escalation success. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Marcus raised his voice. Third, a civilian oversight committee will be established with genuine authority to review complaints and recommend disciplinary action. This committee will include representatives from communities most affected by aggressive policing practices. He addressed Antoine Johnson directly. Mr. Johnson will receive compensation for his unlawful detention and violation of his rights. The amount will be determined in subsequent proceedings, but will be substantial enough to reflect the seriousness of the violations. Marcus paused, knowing his next words would be the most controversial. Finally, this court orders a comprehensive review of all arrests made by the Abington Township Police Department in the past 3 years, where the initial stop was based on vague criteria such as matched a description, furtive movements, or high crime area presence. Cases where evidence suggests racial profiling may be eligible for appeal and potential dismissal. The courtroom erupted. Supporters cheered. Officers shouted in protest. Gordon looked stricken. Hargrove stormed out. Marcus gavelled for order. It took several minutes to restore quiet. This court recognizes that these remedies are broad and will impact the department significantly. However, the evidence before this court demonstrates that narrow remedies would be insufficient to address systematic violations of constitutional rights. He looked across the faces in the courtroom, seeing hope on some, fury on others. The law enforcement officers in our communities carry enormous responsibility and face genuine dangers. This court has the deepest respect for those who serve honorably, but respect for law enforcement cannot mean immunity from accountability. Constitutional rights are not suggestions, they are requirements. And when those rights are systematically violated, courts have not just the authority, but the obligation to intervene. Marcus made eye contact with Reynolds, who sat with his head bowed. Officer Reynolds, your testimony demonstrated courage and integrity. While you must face consequences for past actions, this court acknowledges your willingness to speak truth and hopes you will be part of building a better system. He turned to where Brennan would have been. Officer Brennan remains in custody for contempt. His behavior yesterday revealed the attitudes that enabled these violations. He will remain in custody until he demonstrates genuine understanding of his contempt and commits to compliance with this court's authority. Marcus's voice softened slightly. To the community members who testified, who shared painful experiences, who maintained faith that justice could prevail, this court thanks you. Your courage made this possible. Finally, he addressed Antoine Johnson. Mr. Johnson, you filed this complaint knowing the system was stacked against you. You persisted despite being told that nothing would change. Because of your courage, something has changed. Justice is not just what happens in this courtroom. Justice is what happens because of what happens in this courtroom." Marcus gathered his papers. "This court is adjourned." The gavel came down with a crack that sounded like thunder. The courtroom exploded into chaos. Reporters rushed for the doors. Community members embraced crying. Officers stalked out in protest. Antoine Johnson sat motionless, tears streaming down his face. Rivera embraced her client while cameras flashed. Gordon packed his briefcase mechanically, already mentally drafting the appeal he knew was coming. Marcus remained on the bench as the courtroom slowly emptied. Through the windows, he could see the crowd outside had grown to hundreds, chanting, celebrating, protesting. Vanessa appeared at the bench with Jamal and Zora. "You did it," she said quietly. "I did something," Marcus corrected. "Whether it's enough, whether it lasts, that's up to everyone else now." Jamal looked at his father with something like awe. "Dad, you just changed everything." Marcus stood, his judicial robe suddenly feeling lighter than it had in years. "I just tried to make the words above that door mean something." He gestured to the engraving they could barely see from this angle. "Equal justice under law." As they left the courthouse through a side exit, Marcus's phone exploded with notifications. News alerts, interview requests, messages of support and condemnation in equal measure. One text stood out. It was from Officer Daryl Jackson. "Thank you for giving us a chance to be better." Marcus replied simply, "Thank you for telling the truth." That night, every major news network led with the story. Legal analysts debated the implications. Police unions called for Marcus's removal. Civil rights organizations called him a hero. Politicians scrambled to position themselves on all sides of the issue. But Marcus wasn't watching the news. He was in his backyard with his family grilling burgers, listening to his children laugh, holding his wife's hand. Tomorrow would bring appeals and attacks and attempts to undermine everything he'd done. Tomorrow would bring the hard work of implementing reforms against institutional resistance. But tonight, for just a few hours, Marcus allowed himself to believe that justice could prevail, because sometimes it took someone experiencing injustice themselves to finally see clearly enough to change it. And sometimes one judge in one courtroom could start something that even power and tradition couldn't stop. The work was just beginning, but at least now it had truly begun. The appeals came faster than Marcus had anticipated. By 7 a.m. the next morning, before he'd even finished his coffee, the police union had filed emergency motions with the state appellate court, seeking to stay his orders and remove him from the case. By noon, they'd held a press conference on the courthouse steps. Marcus watched it on the television in his chambers. The union president, a thick-necked man named Daniel McCarthy, stood surrounded by officers in dress uniforms. "Judge Holloway has shown himself to be biased, vindictive, and unfit to preside over any case involving law enforcement," McCarthy declared, his voice rising with rehearsed indignation. "He used his position to settle a personal score and has now issued orders that will endanger every citizen in this community. We are demanding his immediate recusal and the reversal of his dangerous ruling." And behind McCarthy, officers held signs reading, "Support our police and justice for officers." The optics were carefully staged, but Marcus could see through it. This wasn't about justice. This was about power and who got to hold it. His phone rang. Chief Justice Harmon again. "The appellate court wants to hear arguments tomorrow," Harmon said without preamble. "They're treating this as an emergency matter." "Of course they are," Marcus replied. "The union has political connections." "Marcus, I'm going to be frank with you. There are 3 judges on that panel. 2 of them have strong relationships with law enforcement. They're going to be looking for any reason to overturn you." "Then let them look. The law is on my side." "The law isn't always what matters when politics gets involved. Be prepared for this to get uglier." Marcus hung up and found Diane Chen waiting at his door. "I'm coming with you to the appellate court tomorrow. You're going to need support." "I appreciate it, but this could hurt your career too." "Then we'll both find new careers," Diane said firmly. "What you did was right. Someone needs to stand with you." That afternoon, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Officer Reynolds appeared at his chambers out of uniform, looking like he'd aged 10 years overnight.
Your Honor, I know I shouldn't be here, but I needed to tell you something. Marcus gestured for him to sit. What is it, Officer Reynolds? There are officers planning to refuse to implement your orders. They're calling it a work slowdown. They're going to claim the new policies make it impossible to do their jobs safely. Marcus felt his stomach tighten. That's their right, though it's essentially admitting that their jobs depend on violating constitutional rights. Reynolds shook his head. It's worse than that. Some of them are talking about making examples, letting crime happen in certain neighborhoods. Then they'll blame your ruling for it. They're willing to let people get hurt to prove a political point. Not all of them, but enough. And Captain Preston is going along with it because he's terrified of losing control of his department. Reynolds met Marcus's eyes. I'm testifying to all of this at the appellate hearing tomorrow. The union told me to stay quiet, but I'm done staying quiet. After Reynolds left, Marcus sat in silence. He'd known there would be resistance, but deliberate dereliction of duty to undermine reform was something else entirely. People could die because officers wanted to protect a broken system. That evening, Marcus drove to the hospital to visit his mother. Dorothy was sitting up in bed, the news playing on the television mounted to the wall. "There's my boy," she said, her voice stronger than it had been days ago, "making all kinds of trouble." "You saw the news." "Baby, everyone saw the news. Your face is on every channel." She muted the television. "Come here and sit down." Marcus pulled a chair close to her bed. His mother took his hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "I want to tell you about your grandfather," she said. "My daddy. You never met him because he died when you were just a baby, but he was a man who understood about fighting systems. Mom, you need to rest. I'll rest when I'm dead. Right now I need to tell you this." Dorothy's eyes grew distant. "Your grandfather was a sharecropper in Mississippi in the 1940s. He watched white landowners cheat black farmers out of their crops, their land, their lives. He watched men get lynched for speaking up. He watched the system grind people down until they accepted that this was just how things were." She squeezed Marcus's hand. "But he never accepted it. He organized the black farmers, helped them keep accurate records, taught them to read contracts. The white landowners beat him 3 times trying to make him stop. The last time they broke his jaw so bad he couldn't eat solid food for 6 months." Marcus had never heard this story. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" "Because I was hoping you'd never need to know it. I was hoping by the time you grew up things would be different enough that you wouldn't have to fight the same battles." Her voice broke slightly. "But they're not different enough, are they?" "No, Mom, they're not." "Then you need to hear what your grandfather told me before he died. He said, Dorothy, changing systems costs something. It costs comfort. It costs safety. Sometimes it costs everything. But not changing them costs more. It costs souls. It costs humanity. It costs the future. That's what you're paying now, baby, the cost of change." Marcus felt tears burning his eyes. What if the cost is too high? What if I can't protect our family from what comes next? Dorothy pulled him closer. "You're already protecting them. You're showing your children that standing up matters. You're showing them that one person with courage can shake the foundations. That's worth any cost." Marcus stayed with his mother until visiting hours ended. When he left, he felt something shift inside him. The fear was still there, but it no longer controlled him. The appellate court hearing the next morning was held in a grand courtroom that made Marcus's usual venue look modest. 3 judges sat on an elevated bench, their faces stern and unreadable. The center judge, Patricia Westbrook, was known for her conservative rulings and close ties to law enforcement unions. Gordon presented the union's arguments first, claiming Marcus had exceeded his authority, demonstrated bias, and issued remedies that were overly broad and punitive. Judge Holloway didn't just rule on the specific complaint before him, Gordon argued. He used that complaint as a vehicle to impose his personal agenda on an entire police department. He essentially placed the department under federal consent decree authority without federal involvement. This is judicial overreach of the most egregious kind. When it was the defense's turn, Rivera stood and did something unexpected. "Your Honor, before I present arguments, Officer Kyle Reynolds has information relevant to this court's decision. He's requested permission to testify." Judge Westbrook looked skeptical. "This is highly irregular. We're not conducting a trial here." I understand, Your Honor, but Officer Reynolds has direct knowledge of circumstances that bear on whether Judge Holloway's orders were appropriate. I believe the court needs to hear it. After a brief consultation with her fellow judges, Westbrook agreed. Officer Reynolds may make a statement, but this is not testimony subject to cross-examination. Reynolds approached the podium, visibly nervous. Your Honors, my name is Kyle Reynolds. I'm one of the officers who violated Mr. Johnson's rights. I'm also one of the officers who arrested Judge Holloway. He took a breath. I'm here to tell you that Judge Holloway's orders were not only appropriate, they were necessary. The courtroom stirred. Gordon looked like he wanted to object, but had no grounds. Everything Judge Holloway said about our department is true, Reynolds continued. We were trained not officially, but culturally to profile based on race. We were rewarded for making stops in minority neighborhoods, regardless of constitutional justification. When I tried to speak up about it, before I was told to keep quiet or find another department. Judge Westbrook leaned forward. Officer Reynolds, are you aware that your statement could jeopardize your career? Yes, ma'am, but I'm more aware that staying silent makes me complicit in violating people's rights. Reynolds pulled out a folder. I brought documentation, performance evaluations that explicitly praise officers for aggressive enforcement in high crime areas, which is code for minority neighborhoods, internal memos about maintaining productivity quotas, complaints that were dismissed without investigation. He placed the folder on the podium. Judge Holloway didn't exceed his authority. He used exactly the authority necessary to address a problem that leadership refused to acknowledge for years. If you overturn his ruling, you're telling every police department in this state that constitutional violations are acceptable as long as they're done systematically. The silence after Reynolds finished was profound. Even Gordon seemed at a loss. Judge Westbrook spoke carefully. Officer Reynolds, this court appreciates your candor. We will review your documentation. She turned to Rivera. You may proceed with your arguments. Rivera's presentation was masterful. She cited case after case establishing courts' authority to impose broad remedies when constitutional violations were systemic. She referenced the documentation Reynolds had provided, showing it corroborated everything established in the hearing. The union argues that Judge Holloway demonstrated bias, Rivera said, but having direct experience with the misconduct in question doesn't create bias, it creates insight. Judge Holloway didn't rule based on anger or revenge. He ruled based on a comprehensive evidentiary record that would compel any honest jurist to the same conclusion. When both sides finished, the appellate judges retired to deliberate. Marcus, Diane, and Rivera waited in a conference room down the hall. Vanessa had come with Jamal and Zora, all three sitting quietly. How long do you think they'll take? Jamal asked. Could be hours, could be days, Marcus replied. It took 90 minutes. The bailiff summoned them back to the courtroom. Marcus's heart pounded as he took his seat. Judge Westbrook spoke for the panel. This court has reviewed the arguments, the documentation provided by Officer Reynolds, and the record from the underlying hearing. While we have concerns about certain procedural aspects of this matter, we find that Judge Holloway acted within his authority. Marcus felt the tension in his shoulders release slightly. However, Westbrook continued, and Marcus tensed again. We are modifying certain aspects of the remedies ordered. The review of past arrests will be limited to cases involving Officers Brennan and Reynolds specifically, rather than the entire department. This narrows the scope while still addressing the pattern established by these officers. It wasn't everything Marcus had hoped for, but it was something. The core reforms would stand. Furthermore, Westbrook said, her voice taking on unexpected steel. This court wishes to address the allegations of bias against Judge Holloway. A judge who experiences the very misconduct he's asked to adjudicate doesn't become biased. He becomes informed. We find no evidence that Judge Holloway allowed personal experience to override legal judgment. To the contrary, his ruling demonstrates careful legal reasoning supported by substantial evidence. She looked directly at the union attorneys. We are troubled by suggestions that judges should recuse themselves from cases simply because they have relevant personal experience with the issues involved. Such a standard would disqualify judges from hearing cases in precisely those situations where their insight would be most valuable.
The union attorneys looked like they'd swallowed something bitter. "Judge Holloway's orders are affirmed with the modifications noted," Westbrook concluded. "This court is adjourned." As they left the courthouse, reporters swarmed. Marcus made a brief statement. "Today's ruling affirms that constitutional rights matter, that courts have authority to address systemic violations, and that personal experience with injustice doesn't disqualify judges from seeking justice. This is a victory not just for Mr. Johnson, but for every person who believes equal protection under law should mean something." The real work began the following week. Marcus chaired the first meeting of the newly formed Police Accountability Commission in the Abington Township Community Center. The room was packed with officers, community members, activists, and local officials. The tension was palpable. Captain Preston sat in the front row, his expression carefully neutral. Behind him, officers watched with varying degrees of hostility and curiosity. On the other side of the room, community members who'd filed complaints sat with arms crossed, skeptical that anything would really change. Marcus opened the meeting. "I know many of you don't want to be here. Officers who feel they're being unfairly targeted. Community members who've been promised change before and seen nothing happen. I understand that skepticism. But skepticism without engagement guarantees that nothing changes." He pulled up presentation slides. "Here's what's already been implemented. Every officer now wears a body camera that uploads footage automatically. Footage is reviewed weekly by a civilian panel. In the 3 weeks since implementation, we've seen a 47% reduction in use of force incidents." An officer in the back raised his hand. "That's because we're afraid to do our jobs. If we so much as touch someone, we'll end up in court." Marcus nodded. "I understand that concern. Let me ask you something. In the past 3 weeks, has crime increased?" The officer hesitated. "Well, no, but crime has actually decreased by 11%, Marcus said. "That suggests that aggressive tactics weren't making communities safer. They were just making communities more afraid of police." A woman stood up, her voice shaking with emotion. "My son was stopped 5 times last year, 5 times for nothing. Each time he was terrified he wouldn't come home. Since these changes, he hasn't been stopped once. That's not because he changed his behavior. That's because officers stopped seeing him as automatically suspicious." The conversation continued for 2 hours. It wasn't comfortable. Officers voiced legitimate concerns about safety and the difficulty of their jobs. Community members shared painful experiences of being profiled and harassed, but they were talking, really talking for the first time. Near the end of the meeting, Officer Daryl Jackson stood. "I want to say something to my fellow officers. When I first joined the force, I thought being a good cop meant making lots of stops, getting lots of arrests. That's what got praised. That's what got rewarded. But I realized something. Every time I made a stop without real cause, I wasn't making the community safer. I was making them distrust us more, and that distrust makes us all less safe." He turned to face the other officers. "These reforms aren't attacking us. They're helping us be better. They're helping us be the officers we took an oath to be." Some officers nodded, others looked away, but Jackson had planted a seed. Over the following months, Marcus watched the changes take root. Body camera footage revealed officers who'd been using excessive force for years. Those officers were disciplined, some fired. Other officers, previously afraid to speak up, began reporting misconduct by their colleagues. The Civilian Oversight Committee, chaired by Reverend Crawford, proved effective. They reviewed complaints, thoroughly recommended appropriate discipline, and provided transparency that had been lacking for decades. Antoine Johnson used his settlement to enroll in a criminal justice program. "I want to be a prosecutor," he told Marcus during a chance meeting at the courthouse. "I want to be someone who holds officers accountable from inside the system." Officer Reynolds, after completing his suspension and retraining, requested transfer to the Community Relations Division. He spent his days building bridges between police and neighborhoods that had been over-policed for generations. Officer Brennan was a different story. After his release from contempt, he resigned from the force and moved to a different state. His departure was quiet, but his legacy remained as a cautionary tale about what happens when prejudice goes unchallenged. 6 months after the ruling, Marcus received an invitation to speak at a national conference on police reform. Standing before hundreds of judges, prosecutors, and law enforcement officials, he told his story. "I didn't set out to become the face of this issue," Marcus said. "I was just a man getting gas who experienced what millions of Black Americans experience regularly. The difference was that I had power and position. Most people don't. Most people experience injustice and have no recourse, no platform, no ability to force change." He looked across the audience. "Every person in this room has power. Judges have power to hold systems accountable. Prosecutors have power to charge officers who break the law. Police leadership has power to change culture. The question isn't whether we have power. The question is whether we have the courage to use it." At home, the changes were evident in smaller, more personal ways. Jamal no longer tensed up when police cars drove past. Zora had joined a youth advocacy group working on criminal justice reform. Vanessa had taken on 3 pro bono cases representing families of police misconduct victims. One evening, as Marcus sat on his back porch watching the sunset, Vanessa joined him with 2 glasses of wine. "I got a call today," she said, "from the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. They want to know if you'd be interested in serving on their board." "What did you tell them?" "That I'd ask you." "But Marcus, it's more than just serving on a board. They want you to be a national voice for judicial accountability in civil rights cases." Marcus considered this. For 20 years, he'd kept his head down, done his job, avoided controversy. Then one night at a gas station had changed everything. "What do you think I should do?" he asked. Vanessa took his hand. "I think you should do what you've been doing. Tell the truth. Use your power. Change what needs changing." Marcus squeezed her hand. "Even if it costs us, especially if it costs us, because the alternative costs more." He thought about his grandfather beaten for organizing sharecroppers. He thought about Dorothy Perkins, who'd spent decades grieving a son killed by police. He thought about Antoine Johnson, who'd filed a complaint knowing the system was rigged against him. "Tell them yes," Marcus said. The following month, Marcus was invited back to the Sunoco station where everything had started. Mr. Patel had installed a small plaque on the outside wall. On this site, November 20th, 2024, Judge Marcus Holloway was unlawfully arrested, sparking reforms that changed our community. May we never forget that justice requires constant vigilance. Marcus stood reading the plaque, remembering the fear and humiliation of that night. But he also remembered what came after, the courage of witnesses who testified, the conscience of Reynolds, who spoke truth, the determination of a community that demanded change. A young Black man approached him, maybe 19 years old. "Excuse me, are you Judge Holloway?" Marcus nodded. "I am." "I just wanted to say thank you. I got stopped last month, first time since all the changes. The officer was polite, explained exactly why he pulled me over. It was a legit broken taillight, and he helped me figure out where to get it fixed cheap. He treated me like a person. That never happened before." The young man extended his hand. "My name's Marcus, too. My mom named me after Marcus Garvey. But maybe now it's like I'm named after you, too." After the young man left, Marcus stood alone at the gas station pump where it had all begun. The fluorescent lights cast the same harsh shadows. The same traffic rumbled past on Roosevelt Boulevard. But something fundamental had shifted. A police cruiser pulled into the station. Marcus tensed instinctively, old fear resurfacing. But the officer who emerged was Daryl Jackson. He waved and approached with a smile. "Evening, Judge Holloway. Just getting coffee. How are you?" "I'm good, Officer Jackson. How are things at the department?" "Better," Jackson said. "Not perfect, but better. We've got a new training officer who actually teaches constitutional rights instead of shortcuts. We've got officers who are learning that community trust makes the job easier, not harder. It's slow, but it's real." After Jackson went inside, Marcus finished pumping his gas, the mundane task that had triggered everything. As he replaced the pump and screwed on his gas cap, he thought about the journey from that night to this moment. The work wasn't finished. Appeals were still pending. Resistance was still strong.
Other departments in other cities still practiced the same discriminatory policing that had been exposed here. But something had changed, something that couldn't be unchanged. One judge in one courtroom had proven that individuals with courage could challenge systems with power. That personal experience with injustice could become a catalyst for systemic change. That the law, when applied honestly and fearlessly, could actually mean what it promised. Marcus got into his car and headed home. Tomorrow he'd return to his courtroom and hear more cases. He'd continue chairing the Accountability Commission. He'd keep speaking out, keep pushing for reform, keep using whatever power he had to bend the arc of justice a little closer to what it should be. Because that night at the gas station had taught him something he'd known intellectually, but now understood viscerally. Justice wasn't a destination. It was a practice, a choice, a daily commitment to see people's humanity before their skin color, to value constitutional rights over convenience, to believe that equal protection under law had to mean everyone or it meant nothing. The system hadn't been perfect before that night, and it wasn't perfect now, but it was better. And in the difficult, frustrating, often heartbreaking work of justice, better was worth fighting for. Better was worth any cost. Better was worth everything. Because sometimes it took being slammed against a car hood to finally understand what countless others had been saying for generations. And sometimes it took one person refusing to accept injustice to show others that acceptance was never required. The choice had always been there. The choice to see or ignore, to act or accept, to use power for change or comfort. Marcus had made his choice that night when he decided to take the bench despite his personal involvement. And he would make that same choice every day for the rest of his career, for the rest of his life. That was what his grandfather had meant. The cost of change was high, but the cost of not changing was the future itself. And Marcus Holloway had finally paid the price to give his children and all children a future where justice wasn't just a word carved above courtroom doors. It was a lived reality fought for and defended by everyone who believed humanity mattered more than power, that rights mattered more than convenience, that one person's courage could light the way for thousands more. And on a quiet evening in Philadelphia, driving home from a gas station where his life had changed forever, Judge Marcus Holloway understood that the greatest power any person possessed wasn't authority or position or wealth. It was the power to choose justice, even when justice cost everything, especially when it cost everything, because that was when it mattered most.